malaria mosquitoes fast. So get Multi Power Guard.
You are watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. Now, to start our discussion on the environment and flooding, let's take this report by Victor Azu.
Floods have impact on both individuals and communities and have social, economic, and environmental consequences. The consequences of floods vary greatly depending on their location, duration, depth, and speed, and these could include loss of human lives, damage to property, destruction of crops, loss of livestock, and deterioration of health conditions owing to waterborne diseases. As communication links and infrastructure such as power plants, roads and bridges are damaged and disrupted, some economic activities may come to a standstill and people are forced to leave their homes. Already, the Nigerian Meteorological Agency NIMET has predicted 60 local governments spread in 25 states of the country, including Kano, Anambra, Lagos, Oyo, Delta, and Cross River, to be prone to flooding. As this year's rainy season kicks into gear, therefore, it becomes expedient to identify and avoid as much as possible the human causes of flooding. In most cases, flooding is simply the result of a powerful weather system, but certain human activities can exacerbate the chances of flooding and make it worse when it occurs. For this reason, urban development, agriculture, and deforestation require careful management to keep natural disasters from occurring. Drains and waterways also need to be free of all forms of blockages to avoid flood disasters. For other precautionary measures, guests on Good Morning Nigeria are already seated.
Now, joining us to discuss this in our Abuja studio is the Dr. Victor Fodeke, an environmentalist. Thank you, sir, for coming on the program.
Good morning.
And also in our Abuja studio is Dr. John Osonwa, climate change and environment expert. Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And we also have in the studio with us, Abbas Idris is the Director, FCT Emergency Management Agency. Thank you for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, gentlemen, you're welcome to the show. And let's begin this way. We have incidents of flooding in this country for some years now. The most devastating was that of 2012, which we still make reference to because of the devastating nature of that flooding. Now, could it have been avoided in the first place? And let me begin with the environmentalist, Dr. Fodeke.
Yes, it could have been avoided because we know that when floods are about to happen, we have the relevant agency, that is the NIMET, that has actually predicted and has been doing an excellent job, because early warning system is one of the tools that if we take, that is when birds learn that men learn to shoot without missing, they also learn to fly without perching. When we are being warned that there are going to be incidents of flood, the next thing is to be prepared. That's the next level. Preparedness is the next level. We know exactly if we have what is called the hazard map or the flood map of the areas to be flooded. The next line is to design and ensure that the pathway for this flood is prepared and that we are ready to receive you, flood. Mr. Flood, you are coming. We are ready to receive you. We open some of the rivers needs to be dredged. Some of the drainages need to be cleared, and we can actually store some of this flooded water and prepare for the dry season to be able to boost agricultural program as it's been done in China. That's what we need to do here. It is designed to be a disaster, but it will be a blessing for us because we can channelize this water, knowing fully well that there are times when it's going to be dry, and then we have the dry season farming. I think that is the beautiful thing about the very bad situation that we see now, because we know that it is coming. It's knocking at our door. NIMET tells us as areas, in fact, the hazard map should be the custodian of citizens in those localities that has been predicted that it will happen. And when you know that a thief is coming to your house at a particular time, you are well prepared. And the next level I want to talk about is that year in, year out, floods come in and take life. Then we need to have what is called first responders.
We're
Those
going
will
to
save
get
lives.
into what happens after the flood. But we'll stick with preparedness for now, Dr. Osonwa. Let us talk about the preparedness. Flood is, like Dr. Fodeke just said, happens every time with devastating effects. What has been our state of preparedness over the years, and what should be done to improve it?
I agree with Dr. Fodeke. The problem we have, as he has pointed out, is that you have this historical mindset that traps people in ignorance. And by that I mean, if you go to parts of Ibadan, people have been flooded for centuries. You go to parts of the Niger Delta region, they experience flooding. You go to Kogi, if you're passing along the banks of River Niger, River Benue up north, you will see watermarks on buildings clearly indicating that there has been flood. And sometimes you see 2 or 3 different water levels that are etched in the building now. That is an indication that these people have had flooding historically. But people, once the flood recedes, people still come back into these communities as if nothing has happened. And that is because we've been experiencing flooding even as children. We've always had flooding in Nigeria. But the problem that we have now is the floods we had when we were growing up are very different from what we're seeing now, because there are climate change factors aggravating the situation. In the past, you have rains, you have minor flooding. Now we have a situation where, because of climate change and global warming, the Arctic ice, if you're looking at the map of the world, the top region, if you're holding it as a football, the top section that you see, that's the Arctic Circle, has held ice for eons of years. And this ice is very massive. People don't understand the hugeness of the ice. The whole geographical region of Africa is about 30 million square kilometers. The Arctic region is also 30 million square kilometers. That gives you a sense. Nigeria is only 1 million square kilometers. So it is a huge expanse of ice, very thick. And it has been melting. We have satellite images from the US. If you look at the images in the past 30 years, that ice has melted by almost half. And it feeds into all the major oceans and seas, feeds into the Pacific Ocean, feeds into the Atlantic Ocean, which affects us, feeds into the Arctic Ocean, deals with England, Iceland, deals with Barents Sea. So it is a major distributor of water. And I'm talking about a lot of water. So what happens is, in areas where you ordinarily would not have flooding from average rain, now you have flooding because the water level is already higher than it should be. So that's why we're having all this flooding in Lagos, Ikoyi, VI. Then climate change has also made our land very dry. Desertification in the north leads to flash flooding. So people are not aware of these extraneous factors that are compounding the behavioral lapses that we see. So you need to take the global picture and juxtapose it with the domestic one to have a true sense.
Dr. Osonwa, we'll go into the nitty-gritty of this issue of climate change, because it's a major contributor. In the course of this conversation, we shall get to that level so that people will begin to understand why and the nature of the flooding that we have in this part of the world. Now, but let's go to the FCT Director, Emergency Management Agency, Abbas Idris. Now, let's take Abuja as a case in point, because we are still on the issue of preparedness, right? And Abuja, of course, has recorded flood. As a matter of fact, even this year and sometime last year, we know the story of a man who was swept away with his 2 children in Gwarimpa area. And of course, if it rains in Abuja, Area 8 has the issue of flooding. So, in Abuja, as your epicenter, what do you do in terms of preparation for flood, which you know, of course, is going to occur?
Thank you very much. You see, preparedness is one of the key principles of all the emergency management agencies, and we put it as a key to our operations. Before the incidence of, before the rain comes, we normally go around to take statistics and inspect and do the hazard mapping like my colleague has mentioned. We were able to identify the flood-prone areas as part of the preparedness, and also we were able to earmark some buildings that were done in floodplain areas. We did that, and we were able to also call our our partners or stakeholders, like the development control, to ensure that they did not approve any building on those floodplain areas, and also to ensure that all the drainages are desilted. We have done that, and we also went round all the districts to ensure that we enlighten them about flooding. In fact, we carried out those clips that occurred last year in Dede and Lokogoma. I think you were referring to Lokogoma, not Gwarimpa, where one person died along with two of his children when he was driving through the flooded water. So we carry out the campaign. As I'm talking to you, our team are all out for another second phase of the campaign to ensure that we sensitize the public against the impact or the effect of flooding. And we are battle ready. Our team of rescuers are there 24 hours and ensuring that in case of anything, we are able to rescue, at least to minimize the losses. We also went around to engage those professional divers in the villages, because we discovered that they usually be the first responders before our arrival. And so we brought them into our own system, trained them, and we are giving them all the modern equipment so that before we get there, definitely they will be able to do some rescue. We also instructed all the area councils to inaugurate the emergency local committees, which they have done so, because we believe that without the communities, with community involvement, we will not be able to achieve our aim. We can be in the LCT city center as well as being at Abaji, Yaba, and so on at the same time. So we make sure that the communities are involved. We also recruited volunteers in all the wards and trained them. We are giving them all the wherewithal to ensure that because they can speak the language, they disseminate the information, the early warning system that we pass through, which they are really working. And I think we are trying to make sure that we reduce. And mark you, the flooding in Abuja are human induced, because we have well-structured drainages, the buildings are well constructed, but because of the activities of the residents, normally we have such flooding occurring.
That's exactly what we're going into now, Mr. Idris.
Yes.
The environmental issues. And I'll start with Dr. Fodeke on that. In many instances, prevention is always better than palliatives, in fact, in most cases, especially with flooding. And just like he just said, people, no matter how well you prepare, you have sensitized people, you have told them what is going to happen, if people do not do what they're supposed to do, we'll still continue to have these instances. So how does the environment impact on this flooding and its severity?
Thank you very much. The director has a very excellent preparedness plan, and I must commend him for that, because part of what he mentioned that I want to really emphasize is the issue of a core of first responders. But before that one, I want us to look, when we talk about the preparedness in this area, when you have the hazard maps or the flood maps, the next line of action is the enforcement. If the enforcement is not there, the map is distributed to the people to know that, look, your building is on the path of this Mr. Flood. He's going to carry you away, whether you like it or not. He will come at a time you don't even expect, maybe when you are sleeping. So the best thing is to ensure that you are not in his way, because he will carry you away. And then you make sure that there are incentives and disincentives in enforcing these laws that ensure that you do not build on the floodplain. And I want to also commend you for the aspect of mobilizing the citizens, because this information is, and this brings my mind to what the NTA is really doing, in getting information in a timely manner, using of all the other means of town hall meetings and village meetings to ensure that everybody knows what is going to happen. Because when the information is out in the developed world, they spend a lot of effort to ensure that you know this is going to happen. This is going to happen to you, and to ensure that you move, if your house or your building or whatever structure, and to ensure that they don't even cut some trees and all the sort of open things that are environmental things that can stop the water. Because this grassification and all the rest are means of arresting the water from moving away and carrying all the nutrients from the farmland there. So when you mobilize the citizens, you need to also let them to know what they need to do before help arrives. There are certain things you need to have with you, because it may take 1, 2, or 3 days before help arrives. And I just hope that this year there will be no loss of life, that all the effort we need to do is in preventing it before it happens, because it is too late to cry when all the destructions comes. And I want to also, when we talk about FCT here, our coastal areas are very flood-prone areas. The UN did a workshop some years ago, just before the 2012 something, and they brought all the coastal states there. It is shocking to note that 50% of the economy of this country are in the coastal area, and about 30% of the citizens are along the coastline. And there's a need for us to look at the strategic sort of implication of this one, and to know the economic implication of this, and to have a contingency plan. That brings me down to all the areas in which are known as flood-prone area, to develop what is called contingency plan or preparedness plan, in which everybody knows the plan, everybody knows what to do, and you have a core of first responders that are trained, as the director has said here. We don't have a core. If I get to the United States today, I'm trained as a first responder. I will have my red cap against hazards. So we have equipment that given to you, self-contained breathing apparatus, so that if you go into a hazardous area, you can go and save lives first. And that's what our motive should be. Our motto should be this, in this very year of this year we're talking about, that we should make sure and decide that no life will be lost and no property will be. The economic, is very horrendous, sort of the losses economically, because we are talking about poverty, we're talking about things that are not right in there, and the means of making sure that we create wealth and we give proper life and sustainable development goal, and tapping into what we have inherited from the top of what the president did, because my colleague is in climate change, in the COP21, the Paris Agreement, has a lot of information to warn us that we have been warned that the implication of the global warming that is bringing all these waters and making areas to be dry is that we should be prepared. Yeah. We don't have to wait for disaster to strike us. When we can prepare for the disaster and welcome it and put him in the right place and turn it to our prosperity.
Okay. Thank you. We are still on this issue of the environment, the impact of environment in all of this. There's a saying in some quarters that the environment does not need the human beings. It's the human beings that really need the environment, because the environment sometimes behaves according to what we give it. Of course, Mr. Idris also said that Abuja, for instance, flooding in Abuja is the human-induced. Now, let's look at the behavioral pattern of Nigerians towards the environment. To what extent has this contributed to flooding in the country? I put it to Dr. Osonwa.
It has. I'm going to touch on that. Then I also want to bring in something that is important. That is the government role, the national government role. We've talked about the FCT. When you look at human behavior, there are a number of things we need to focus on. The first one is we have embarked on this orgy of deforestation for so many years in this country. You look at the statistics. Nigeria, right now, since inception, we've deforested 90% of our forests are gone. Just from independence, 55%, and this is data from the UN, Food and Agriculture Organization. We've also done our research here. Federal Ministry of Environment has research. Every year, for every 1,000 hectares you have, we're losing 356. We're losing about 400, but we're only able to reforest 20-something. So the net loss is horrendous. So the impact of that is when rain comes, before it becomes flooding, usually you're supposed to have barriers. Trees are natural barriers to flooding, but we have stripped away our environment of trees. It's always shocking to me. You come into any estate in Abuja or any place, you have 200 houses, somebody is developing an estate, not a single tree planted. Every place is concretized or interlocking. And that's just an atrocious kind of urban development. You wouldn't see that anywhere in the world. You're supposed to have a certain quantum of green areas for a certain quantum of houses that you develop. But here, everything is stripped. We're doing plazas, we're doing malls, we're doing estates, and we're not incorporating trees and proper drainage systems. So that's a major problem. Deforestation is affecting us in the south, where you have massive erosion. In the north, it's affecting us. Now we have deforestation. So that's one thing we need to check. The other one is something that is very common, use of sachet water plastics. People drink this stuff and just throw it onto the ground. But the problem with that is even when you throw it onto dry ground, the moment wind begins to blow or there is rain, those things have a natural tendency to go to lower ground. And that lower ground in most cases is your drainage systems, your gutters. So it clogs the gutter ways. And people are just oblivious of the dangers of having this clogged drainage system. So when it begins to rain, even when you wouldn't ordinarily have flooding, now you have flood because the drainage systems are already clogged up. So my advice to people, now we're getting into the rainy season, have communal cleanup days, weekends, Saturdays, whatever. The whole community will come and say, today we're going to clean all our drains. It will help you avoid flooding. It will also help you avoid disease, malaria, because those things also harbor malaria. That's where they breed. So now you're dealing with two interrelated environmental problems. The other thing that we're doing, as we have pointed out, is because everybody wants rapid urbanization, everybody wants to live in the big cities. They want to live in Lagos. They want to live in Abuja, in Port Harcourt. These places are very expensive if you want to live in the planned sections. So what people do is they will go and get cheap land on the outskirts where maybe development has not even arrived. Everybody is building, installing their own resources. The toilet facilities are haphazard. So everything is jumbled. And those areas may not be habitable zones. But because they are cheap, you're buying cheap land to build, everybody congregates. And then even when the land is not flood prone, because it has been overpopulated, so you don't have proper movement of water and drainages, we get flooding. So those are the issues we need to begin to happen. But when we get to that stage, I also want to talk about government responsibility. I'm talking about the big government now, not the FCT.
Towards the environment?
Towards the environment that can help us avoid this flooding.
Let's go ahead and
the major one, which has been a recurrent issue, is the failure to build dams that are necessary or to maintain the ones that we already have. Now, I'll give you an example. Cameroon has a dam that drains water into Nigeria. Lagdo Dam is called. We have been planning to build a counterpart dam to contain the excess water that is released. That dam process has been ongoing for about 30 years now. As I'm sitting here today, that dam is not built. Every year, successive governments go into bid processes, consultancy, but the actual dam to contain the water hasn't been built for 30 years. And that's why you're having this devastation along the Taraba zone, Benue zone. It contributes significantly to that. The second one is, if you take an inventory of our current dams, you will find that most of them are only operating at about 40 to 50% capacity. Why? Because of silt. They are not being desilted at the frequency that we ought to be desilting them. Every year you're supposed to desilt. it increases the volume of the dam. So if you allow the silt to accumulate over a period of months or years, now the dam's integrity is affected. First of all, it can't contain as much water. Secondly, the structural integrity becomes affected. That's why you have dams failing sometimes, because the capacity is beyond what was conceived. So those are ways that government, and of course Dr. Vereke has talked about enforcement. The issue of enforcement is a big one. For me, it's always very telling when you're driving around town, then you see those huge ubiquitous signs, red sign that says, do not view, remove. And you see the date, June 2012. And we're now in 2018. That is a failure of enforcement. Because I always say, if there was no right to put that sign on that building, then you shouldn't put it. But if you found that there was legitimacy in putting the sign to demolish, then it should be demolished. So what gives? Something, failure of enforcement somewhere. So
Yes.
those are the issues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Osonwa. We'll go to Abbas Idris now, and still on staying with the contingency plan, they have two other guests have touched mainly on them, especially the role of the government. Would you talk more about that?
Yes, let me talk about the last point he
Yes.
just mentioned. Sometimes, you know, there are different factors why you will have mark on your building. Sometimes it's not to remove completely. Sometimes you erected it without getting the necessary
Approval.
permit. So by the time you get the permit, you will still see that sign on the building.
Maybe they should remove the sign when you get the permit.
That's another thing. You see, it's very difficult for you when you already inscribed. It costs money again to go and remove it. So they will leave it for the owner to remove. That is aside. You see, really, what we do as an agency is to make sure that we really do the right thing at the right time. And especially when we are talking about the government enforcement. The enforcement are diverse. I mean, there are different faceted. We have different implementation level, because there are different multi-agency levels. I mean, so when you need to enforce some demolition, you have to get the development control to do that. When you need something on environmental, you have to get another agency differently to remove the waste. But majorly, we always like the people themselves to assume the role of government. Let them do it first before the government enforce anything for them. And that is the sensitization we are giving to the public, to ensure that you be the first responder before calling any other government agency to come and respond. And that is why the slogan of disaster management is everybody's business comes to be. So I think we need to imbibe that culture. Once we do that, and we have to note that we cannot be living in the past. There are climate change. We have seen a lot of things that are happening in this country that we used to watch on TV. The recent storm in Bauchi is the first thing is so alarming, and so we have to get prepared as agencies. All responsible agencies must get ready for such eventuality in this country. We have been getting these things coming into Nigeria. The flooding, even if you trace the history of flooding, you'll find out that it's incessant now compared to what we used to have before. And that is the reason why we have to change the mind of the public. Normally, you get people who will tell you that their forefathers have lived here for 20 years and nothing happened to them. That is the past. You cannot live in the past. And then also, people should be wary. Any cheap land, especially in Abuja, any cheap land is a floodplain area. People should be, because they always come and they say they buy land in Abuja, they are landlords, they build houses. When you get there, you see that it is a flood-prone area. And that is why when there is any flooding, you see that the casualties are very much, and it affects that group of people who claim to own houses in Abuja. So we have to be wary of that.
All right, thank you very much. You know, some people don't want to leave their ancestral land, and that has even happened in 2012, you know, in the Lokoja area. Anyway, we will return to that. Now, let's thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Victor Fodeke, an environmentalist, thank you for your submissions. Well, we're still continuing, actually. And we have Dr. John Osonwa. Well, thank you for your submissions. We're still continuing. And, of course, Abbas Idris. Now, Nigerians are beginning to react to this conversation and, of course, are making their own input to the conversation by way of tweets. And I'll begin by this tweet from Motana Farouk. One of the major causes of disastrous flooding is indiscriminate waste disposal. Educating people about this habit is a sine qua non for the prevention of environmental hazard. Environment and its components are blessing to us, but they have been blemished by man's quest.
And Mike Anyako says managing garbage by both individuals and government is still a very big challenge in the country. People don't make use of garbage bags. Garbages are thrown out anyhow. Some roads don't have good drainages. The ones that have are littered with garbages. We need to change our attitude as the rainy season is with us to prevent flooding. Regulatory agencies must spell out penalties to possible malfeasance of the rules by recalcitrant individuals. We must always ensure that we keep our environment clean. Cleanliness, they say, is next to godliness.
Now, Dele Jackson Solomon, arguably, over time, the efforts of stakeholders to address the challenges of flooding appears to have been limited by lack of reliable data, a lack of awareness amongst the population affected, and a lack of knowledge of flood risk mitigation. The federal government must empower NIMET to do more. Therefore, in order to prevent floods in Nigeria, there is the need for effective flood plan and floodplain and drainage management, provision of adequate waste disposal facilities in our cities and towns, and holistic implementation of town planning regulations. And it was done in some developed countries of the world. Government at all levels must continue to solicit the support of Nigerians to desist from dumping refuse in the canals and gutters and observe safe and hygienic practices at all times in order to reduce the effect of temporary flooding being recorded in some states. This we must not fail to do.
And Akeju Olagbaju says it is important to convert our underutilized dams as buffer. The climate change is beyond our control. A rainfall above 5 inches in a poorly drained land will cause flood.
Now, Ifeanyi Chukwu says Nigeria should have a national policy on flooding. All right, we return to the conversation here in the studio. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria. And Dr. Osonwa, you see, the dimension you indicated earlier on that you didn't really conclude was that of a climate change contribution to flooding. Well, we've talked about drainage system here in Nigeria, but in other climes, so we have a made drainage system in the Americas, Latin America, and Europe. Flooding has been recorded in the past couple of years in these climes. Now, why? You know, to what extent has climate change really contributed to flooding globally?
And I would add, Dr. Osonwa, because one of our guests said climate change is, one of our contributors onto it said climate change is beyond our control. Is it beyond our control?
Not really.
Okay.
We're just beginning to grasp it. But unfortunately, some of the emissions we have already put out into the atmosphere, it would take hundreds of years to reduce some of that quantum of emission. However, on the ground here, there are things we can do. But let me respond to Mr. Kirian's question. The reason you're seeing so much flooding all over the world harkens back to what I started with. There are a number of factors. The first one is the Arctic region, which, as I said, since the dawn of time, has held ice. It has a balancing effect on global climate. That region, because of global warming, has now been melting at a very rapid pace. Each year breaks the record of the previous year. We always have measurements, Arctic ice, Arctic sea ice measurements every year. And what you're seeing now, if you look at the graph, you will see that every year breaks the record of the previous year in terms of the extent of Arctic ice melting. Second thing that is happening globally, we're also seeing record temperatures. Every year for the past 12 years, we have had the hottest surface temperatures for 10 years recorded. In the past 12 years, we've had more record-breaking years in the past 12 years than we've had in the past 100 years. That is how profound it is. Last year, we set the record highest temperature ever recorded in Kuwait. It was about 56 degrees Celsius, and all over the world. So what am I saying? There are climate change factors that are contributing to extreme weather. Flooding is one of the consequences of that. The other thing we are seeing, hurricanes. You remember, last year we had record number of hurricanes all over the world. U.S. we had up to 3 or 4 hurricanes, record-breaking. And the reason we're having that is climate change affects weather patterns, pulls moisture into the atmosphere in a way that is significant, more significant than ordinary weather pattern would suggest. So when that thing comes back, whether it is rain or it is snow or it comes in the form of hurricane, it is more severe. So the coastal areas also, as I said, because the sea is higher, naturally higher, and this affects Lagos, VI, VGC, all those choice areas in Lagos, the sea is naturally higher than now. The water table is higher. So what that means is you don't need too much rain for it to overflow. And that is happening in New York, it's happening in Boston where I live, it's all the coastal cities in the US are experiencing this. And that also affects us. We're on this side of the Atlantic, they're on the other side. Same phenomenon. So another factor that is a problem here is what we call weather variability. Climate change disrupts the natural weather pattern that we're used to. It used to be you could have a clear demarcation between Harmattan season and rainy season. But in some years, we're not seeing that anymore. You may be surprised to see
in December.
Torrential rain in December, and people are not prepared for that. You may be outdoors, as somebody was driving and was swept away. And this is particularly dangerous in the northern part of Nigeria because the ground has become desertified in most areas. It has become very solid, almost like concrete. So it has lost its natural ability to absorb water. So when you have flash flooding, it's because you're not getting
like
the absorption rate.
For the flood.
Thank you. So it's within 5 minutes you can be in flood that will, 6 inches of flood water can sweep a grown man off his feet.
Wow. Dr. Fodeke, I would want us to also still talk about this issue of attitude. I say that because no matter how well government has prepared, no matter how well environmentalists like you have tried to educate us, if I decide to heed to your advice and my neighbor doesn't, when the flood is coming, he doesn't know whether I heeded or my neighbor didn't. So what should we continue to work on people? How do we continue to make it sink into everybody that this is all about us? The flood does not know who is obeying it and who doesn't.
Well, this is where your organization comes in. Information, repetition is the law of deep impression. The more information you give, the more you need to reinforce, because some people don't even hear the first time. They don't hear the second time. And you need to continue to repeat it and to be able to use the faith-based institution in our churches, in our mosque, when the sermon is going on, to create a special session to warn the people, to change our attitude, because it is our attitude that is responsible for all these various disasters that we see. Because just as we have rightly said, one person obeys, the other does not obey. Look at the environment, the health impact of this flooding we're talking about. The water moves from the gutters and pollutes, it pollutes your well, it pollutes your streams with a lot of sort of diseases that we have. We are hearing of cholera outbreak in some states right now, and it's a result of this dirty water. The groundwater itself is not spared, because when the rubbish that you have decomposes and when rain falls, it moves right into the underground water. And underground water are not easily cleaned up. It moves several thousands of kilometers. And this attitudinal change is something which we should reinforce. About 1% of Nigerians are aware of the diseases that happen to them and linking it to their own habit. Once you cannot link that one, the social media should come out with that to mention it as what the NTA has been doing in the past year. Say, no be another person like day for danger. Now you, when you are in your compound dirty, make sure when you know allow dirty for your road there. The moment a person realizes that it is the excreta that you open defecation is what the flies visit and puts it on your food that gives you the cholera, the sort of the diarrhea and all these intestinal sort of disease that you have. People cannot link it. This is what makes people to describe their house. If you are going on Cocoa Street and along the street you will see a huge rubbish dump. Next to it is my house. Because it is not something of a pride. In US, it is said that not in my backyard. That was the first slogan. The next slogan was, not even in my neighbor's backyard. We will not allow such type of thing to be with you. And we need to continue to reinforce this. And I want to really appeal to the private sector who can partner with the media houses to be able to send this message out in something that is quite different from the normal commercials, to sponsor programs, to sponsor jingles, to sponsor adverts that relate to the health of the people, because the health of the people is the wealth of the people. The person that is sick cannot go and sell. Your small business that you have, you cannot go there for 2 or 3 days because you have malaria. The malaria has been caused by something you did not see. That rubbish that Dr. Osonwa said, it collects the water from the water sachets and brings a situation whereby the mosquito breeds there and they visit you at a time you don't know, and they come and sing in your ears. And when you are down with malaria, your business is also down with malaria. And that's what people need to link with linking the diseases with their habit. And when the message goes on, we use our schools, we use our faith institution, we use every means to bring the message home that it is like sound bites, audio-visual things, and people can get it. And sooner or later, this will begin to sink, to begin to make a difference. The town hall meeting, the marketplaces, and all these avenues that we have.
And there may also be need to employ the local means of town crier, to also send a message in local areas. Now, before we go to tweets that have just come in from Nigerians who are making contribution to this conversation, let me take you on this. Is still in line with the attitudinal change that we mentioned. NIMET on yearly basis brings out the behavior of rainfall across the nation. Likewise, Hydrological Agency of Nigeria, in charge of water movement, brings out predictions on how water will move, whether it's flooding or ordinary. Now, I want to ask you, Idris, since you are into emergency, what should be the attitude of Nigerians living along the coastlines, vis-a-vis the need to get prepared for flooding? Please, in just a minute.
Thank you very much. This is really a source of concern for us as an agency. If you go to satellite towns in Abuja, when it is about to rain, you will see how people are coming with loads, full bags of waste. They will just dump it into drainages. And that is the reason why we imbibe the culture of using communities to really fight those vices in the society. Because if you allow your neighbor to dump refuse on the drainages, it is not his house that is going to be affected, because once the rain comes, the forces would push the waste to the next level, and it will get stuck somewhere. Maybe it could be by your house, and then the water will not flood it and affect your house. So most people will see them and they keep quiet. So we need to really change our attitude towards that. And we want to use this opportunity to also call on all the communities, everybody who is listening, to make sure that we try as much as possible to avoid that. We should be concerned when our neighbor is dumping refuse unnecessarily. Don't look at it and just ignore it. It's going to affect you. So we need to really be on our toes to make sure that we do the right thing, like I said earlier.
Thank you very much, Idris. Let's quickly take our tweets now. Ibrahim Tudu says, this year, 2018, the UN theme for World Environment Day celebration globally is Beat Plastic Pollution. Plastic bottles and plastic bags have taken over the drainages, but unfortunately, some states in Nigeria were indifferent to the sensitization efforts.
All right, now from Ifeanyi Chukwu, it says there is a need for practical solutions to flooding in Nigeria, not only in Abuja and Lagos, but also Abia and Delta states. Nigeria has not done enough to mitigate flooding. We shouldn't play politics with this. The citizens have not had enough sensitization by the critical stakeholders. Government should encourage the citizens to plant trees because it will go a long way to controlling flooding in Nigeria.
Omogbolahan says a discussion about climate change as a whole wouldn't have been appropriate. Yet, year in, year out, flood has become perennial menace, and it seems people are yet to learn and take precautions. Let's make the discussion elaborate with a view to discussing it in a broader perspective. In those days when we were growing up, we had sanitary inspectors called Wole Wole in Yoruba parlance. We had town planners who would regularly come around to inspect houses. You dared not throw refuse or garbage anyhow. But today, all are gone, and the result is blockage of drainages. The experience of Nigerians in year 2012 seemed to have taught us little or no lesson. So many lives and properties were lost as a result of that flooding.
All right, now, Law Alpha C, the accommodation shortage in some flood-prone areas will only make people to return after horrible experiences. Opening gutters and setting exit points for water is germane, but unfortunately, people pour refuse inside gutters when rains fall. A thorough change of attitude to protect the environment is expected from individuals and governments via tree planting.
And this contributor with Twitter handle Bossy Villain says, thank you to @NTA GMN for this program. Nigerians need to be educated on this issue, especially at the schools and grassroots. And at this point, we would like to say thank you also to our guests who have joined us in discussing this vital issue. Dr. Victor Fodeke, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you. Dr. John Osonwa, also thank you for coming in, as well as Abbas Idris, who is the Director of FCT Emergency Management Agency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll take a break now. You know, we have a second discussion.